everybody. I hope you're having a good Wednesday. It is I, Caroline of Inherited Salt, daughter and firstborn to Leah and Ely, here with all my bread goodies. So we're just going to talk sourdough. I have some dough in here. I'm going to show you how I fold it. I got the recipe and all my knowledge from Tara Jensen. This is her book. It's called A Baker's Year. Highly recommend getting it if you want to get into sourdough. But I'm going to first fold the dough and then I'm going to show you and talk to you about my starters. But the dough timer went off a few minutes ago, but I wanted to save it to show you guys. So here she is. I mean, it's pretty substantial. That's a big bowl of dough. It makes for 4 loaves. So I usually keep 1 loaf and give the other 3 away. And I don't do this every day because I don't eat that much bread. But basically, I like to get my hand, sorry, I have a dog trying to climb the barrier we put up for them. That's fine. Come here, Luna. Oh, thank you. Thank you. She's gonna help me out today. This is Luna. She's our newest addition to our pack. But anyways, back to dough. First, I have a little bit of water here. I just like to get my hand wet because it helps keep the dough from sticking. And then I just take my hand and scoop it underneath. And then I gently stretch it all the way over the top. I'm gonna do the same on all sides. Gently stretch over the top. Okay, she's looking good. Okay, I like to get underneath and pull over. I am still pretty new to sourdough. I've only been at this about a month. So feel free to ask me questions. I'll answer what I can. I will reference Tara for the rest. But yeah, so that's my little dough. She's all happy. So basically when I make the dough, I start first by making a leaven. So I made the leaven yesterday. And the leaven is essentially like a bigger starter, and I've talked about this before because a lot of people ask, like, why not just use starter? From what I understand, you make a leaven because you can experiment a little bit with the amount of water and flour that goes into the starter without hurting your original starter, because you want to keep this happy, healthy, so you can always use it again and again and again and have it for as many years as you want. So that way, so you make the leaven without harming your starter. So it's essentially flour, water, and starter makes a bigger starter overnight, and that's what you add to your dough. And so I made the dough this morning, and basically after you assemble it, you let it rest for an hour, and then you do what I just did. You fold. There's like a slap and fold method. There's a few other ways you can do it. This is just the way I do it, especially because it's a lot of dough. So it's just the easiest method, I think. But yeah, I'm just gonna cover her back up. And then I'll set my timer for an hour and I'll give her another fold then.
And this is different than the discard loaf, right?
Yeah, this is different than a discard loaf. So I started by making discard loaves, and that's what Tara calls them. Basically, it's just making dough with your discard starter, because you discard your starter every day to feed it and keep it happy and healthy.
Which we'll see in a little bit too.
Yes, which I'll show you. But yeah, basically the discard was just putting the starter that you're discarding, as long as it would float. You want to make sure it has enough CO2 in it so it will help the bread rise, because starter is what is a natural yeast. It's what you're using instead of using like an active dry yeast like a lot of other bread recipes call for. That's why it's called sourdough, because it naturally ferments. But yeah, you want it for the discard loaf. I would basically do the same thing. I just would skip the leaven step. So I'd make the dough, but I would add starter that I was discarding directly into my dough. Like I said, as long as the starter passed the float test. And the float test just ensures that there's enough CO2 developed in the starter. So, and if you have questions, again, let me know.
I'll pass them on.
Yeah, the hubs will pass them on. All right, so these are my two starters, which I've shown you before. Little Sebastian and Cordelia. I normally feed them in the morning and then late afternoon. I held off this morning so I could show you guys what the process is. So I'll show you Cordelia first. And basically, something that is essential is having a scale.
Is that scale linked on your website?
Yes, I have the scale, this apron, these jars, flour sackcloths. I have all these things for the most part linked in the little shop link on my website, which I can also share in the comments. Oh, and we're not putting the here yet because she still has a couple more hours of resting and folding. But this is called a banneton, and it's this little climbed basket. And so when after the bulk fermentation is done, which is the resting and folding, I will then pre-shape and let my dough hang out in here overnight before I bake it all tomorrow. I only have one right now. I need to get some more bannetons because right now I'm using a straw hat, a metal bowl, and a crystal vessel. That's very beautiful, but not meant for dough. So, all right.
We're going to talk about how it floats here in a little bit once we discard. Somebody asked about how it does it.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe Cordelia will float for us. I doubt she will because she's hungry looking. But
Yes, you can use a loaf pan, but you have to put fabric down, correct, Caroline? Well, we're talking about
to pre-shape
Yeah.
instead of a banneton? Yeah, you could. You could use a loaf pan. So let me reach around.
We'll show you the float test here in a second. I'm pretty sure that, yep.
So here's the straw hat I use because, like I said, this makes 4 loaves, so I have to get creative. Basically, what I use so the dough doesn't stick is I get like another flour sack. Oh, it's already covered in flour. I lay it out and then I press flour into it so that way, like I put a little bit on my dough, but I don't want my dough to get too caked in flour. So I'll press it into the fabric, then I gently sink it in, dust my loaf with a little bit of flour, and put it there to pre-shape. Then I cover it and let it sit in the fridge overnight. So.
Well, the reason I said someone, Leanne, is because it looked like there was 2 people on Saving Dinner's Facebook, so I wasn't sure who I was talking to.
Was it my mother? Hello, mother. Okay. Let's feed Cordelia. She did not pass the float test. She just sunk straight.
Well, we didn't talk about that.
bottom.
What did you do?
Okay, so to do the float test, like I said, hasn't been fed in a little while, so she's probably not going to pass, and she didn't. But when I do the float test, I get a little container of water, dip my fingers in it, and then I tear a piece off the starter and put it in the water. And if it floats, that means there's enough CO2 so you can bake with it.
No, that one did not float, so it just sunk straight.
Yeah, it went straight down, but that's because she's hungry. Like I said, I starved her a little bit today because I wanted to show you guys how I feed her. So, I'll show you. And if you follow along on my stories, and my Instagram stories linked to my Facebook page, you'll usually see like my old float test, and I think I have it saved in my highlights on Instagram too, of when she actually passes. But the cool thing is if you get into this jar here, you can see how like she gets, which is a good sign. I mean, she's healthy, she's fermenting properly. So I'm just gonna discard right into this container. And I think there are recipes where you can use the discard even if it isn't floating. Like in cookies. Yeah, sometimes it'll float towards the bottom. But basically, I want to get this down so I only have 50 grams of my original starter left in the bottom, which is not a lot. It's an alarmingly small amount. But you just want to keep refreshing her. Just because she'll get hungry and she'll want to eat on more. She needs more new fresh flour to feast on. Get those enzymes, ferment. Ooh, I forgot to grab water. Okay, I'll do that really quick.
Hot water?
Yeah, I just want to show.
Yeah, I'll show Luna.
her.
Luna's watching from underneath the table. Yeah, but here's the scale. And then she does this every morning and every afternoon. Yes, I believe you can make a new starter with the discard. I think that's how we started this one here. And I say we, but I actually haven't done this at all. But I feel like I'm part of the process. I watch every day. But yeah, this one's actually been doing really well. And we started that from the discard of the Cordelia one, but it ends up, this one's been great, hasn't it? Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, I think we've been making more bread with Little Sebastian starter than we have with the Cordelia, right?
Yeah.
So I thought. Yes, so perfect. Caroline's just grabbing some like lukewarm water to put in there to mix. Because when we put more in there, it's you don't want cold and you don't want hot. You don't want to, what is the word I'm looking for? Yeah, you just don't want to like.
Just gently warm.
Yeah, you want to gently do it.
All right. Samuel put up a barrier between the kitchen and this nook so the dogs wouldn't be swarming.
Clearly
us.
worked.
Did not work. But it also makes it a little challenging if I forget one little thing. Okay, so I am going to tear off the scale and I just add 100 grams of warm water.
The temperature of the water, I mean, I would say as long as it's like body temperature, if you stick your finger in it and it feels kind of body temperature, it's fine.
Yeah, just like gently warm. You don't want it really hot. You just want it warmer than room temp, essentially. Okay, tear off again. And so I have this beautiful local flour that we get at a local market. And I get to watch them mill it when I buy it, which is pretty cool. But I feed Cordelia with 50 grams of rye flour and 50 grams of bread flour.
Your mom wants to know the ratio. I'm assuming like water to flour that you put in.
Oh, 1 to 1.
That's what I thought. It was 1 to 1, but we just mixed 2 different flours.
Yeah, I mixed 2 different flours, but 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour overall. I just do 50 grams rye for Cordelia, 50 grams bread. For Little Sebastian, I do 50 grams red fife, which is like a hard red wheat. So just, it likes a whole grain. Starters like a whole grain. So this is where I kind of deviate from the book, from Tara Jensen's method, because she likes to only feed it 50 rye, 50 bread flour for the first day, and then after that she only feeds it bread flour. But I found that my starters are happier with a whole grain to feed off of a little bit. And rye tends to have more enzymes and nutrients that kind of helps encourage the fermenting process. All right.
You might hear our dogs in the background. That's pretty normal.
Yeah, the 2 boys. So we have Luna and then we have Fox and Dakota, who we've had Fox and Dakota since they were puppies. But they're brothers and they bicker like brothers. They just sit and growl at each other for hours on end. No actual fights, just growling because that's what everyone wants. Okay, and then we'll do the bread flour.
It seems complicated, but it really isn't. Once you get going, it is pretty simple.
Yeah, it is.
It is kind of like a pet. I would say I'm making kombucha right now, and Caroline's making this, and both have been fun, to be honest.
Yeah, we have a fermentation station. If anyone watches Bon Appetit, you know what I mean. Okay. So now I'm just gonna stir her up.
Get in there.
You just want to make sure you incorporate all the flour and all the water.
Yeah, none of this is. It does seem complicated, but we've just messed around. I mean, Caroline putting the different kind of flour in there has all just been an experiment on how it works.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, we haven't really failed with any of it. It's all kept going pretty well.
Yeah, and with sourdough, like if you're making your own starter from scratch, like Samuel already I know mentioned that you can create another starter from this starter. That's how I made Little Sebastian, and I have a couple friends that want a little bit of one of my starters so that way they can make their own. So basically, if you get a little bit of someone else's starter, I mean, it's a lot easier. If you can already get a little piece of someone's already mature starter, that's the way to do it. And I think even a lot of local bakeries, if they work with starter, you could probably ask them.
Yeah, if they're
like, I mean,
discarding.
50 grams of starter is not a lot. Like, it barely covers like the bottom of a jar. But if you do make it your own from scratch, which you can, I didn't see any real action from Cordelia. Like the second day, I think she rose because you want it to bubble and double in size and get really sour and smell, and get really bubbly and really webby. And she rose kind of the second day, but it wasn't until I think like day 9 that I was actually able to use her for anything, because it can take like 1 to 2 weeks before it's like active enough to use when you bake. If you're making it from scratch.
So this starter, how old is this? Like maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
Day 32. I think today's actually her 30. She's 33 days old.
Pretty new, so...
Yeah, this is still not a super mature starter. I mean, there's people that have had their starter for several years. And a lot of bakeries usually work from a starter that they've had for years.
And Jennifer, I think she wants to know if you can put up your recipe for like making starter from nothing. And I think it's online on your website, but we also talk about that book a little bit more, because that was a good book for starting.
It's a great book, and I have it linked in the caption of this video. Okay. It's a link to, like, I call it Sourdough Diaries, and the first little bit is just me talking about kind of the pleasant journey I've had with sourdough, but I do list towards the end of the blog post like what I do to maintain my starter and how I started it. But yeah, A Baker's Year by Tara Jensen is really wonderful. And I guess she was in North Carolina, which I never knew because I'm from North Carolina, but she was in the Asheville area, and I think she's in Virginia now, but it's been a really great book. It's really beautifully written. She has a lot of other fun recipes for like pancakes, waffles, bread, like kind of like cake and whatnot. Like there's pizza dough that I've made that's been so good. But I also have her book linked in my little shop link on my site. But I highly recommend it. And I'm trying to think what else. I know there was something else I wanted to say about.
Well, thank you, Catherine. Yeah, she worked really hard on the website. I'm glad you like it.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I did. Took a lot of time. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun. It was complicated, and I felt like I was failing when I first started her, especially because I didn't see any progress until day 9. And I think it was like the day after I decided to switch back to using rye and bread flour, because the only bread flour method that Tara uses just wasn't working well for me. And I was posting about it online, and another baker messaged me and let me know that that starters typically like a whole grain in the mix. So it's usually good to do a 50-50 of a whole grain and bread flour.
Yes, Gwen, I think, if I'm not mistaken, elevation does affect starter and bread making, but you should still be able to. Because I know people in Colorado that still make bread and make starters.
Oh,
it's just a little bit different. Like, you might have to kind of play around with it a little bit more, but, just like we did, it's going to be different in every area, but... Yeah,
just see what works for you.
Well, thank you, Joanne.
I'm trying to think what else there is to say. I mean, this is it. I'm excited about my bread tomorrow. I need to get more bannetons and supplies because I feel like I'm turning into a tiny...
So how much is left?
Okay.
You just added some, right?
Yeah, okay, so let me explain the rising and falling. So, like, Little Sebastian here, last night before I went to bed, he had risen up to
and if you can see that line right there,
yeah, he had risen up to here. So he had doubled in size or more than doubled in size. But then when they get hungry again, they'll sink back down. And you can normally tell when they're hungry because a dimple will kind of form in the top of the starter, which means you need to feed them. And so for me, like with how they work, if I want, like I can feed them just once a day, but I usually feed them twice a day, especially like if I want them at a place where there's enough CO2 that I can bake with them. So I usually feed twice a day. And I know you can keep them in the fridge if you want to keep them dormant, like if you're not going to be baking with them every day, and then just feed them at least once a week, or if you're going to be baking once or twice a week, you would feed them before you bake with it. And I haven't tried it yet, so I don't have lots of wisdom in terms of that, but I'm pretty sure Tara talks about it in her book, and I'm sure if you Google it, there's tons of information out there. But
and then Catherine, to answer your question, we only have one Dutch oven as well, so that's all we've been doing is just the one.
Yeah, I have one Dutch oven, and like I have like 2 ovens in my kitchen, but the second one is like a half oven, like it's not a full size, and they're really old vintage like 1960s ovens, and so they're really finicky with how they cook, and so I only trust my bread to be in the full size oven
because that's what we've been using.
And so I just bake one loaf at a time.
But they bake fairly fast, so that's why it's been semi-easy.
Like when I bake, so I'll tell you the baking method as well. When I bake, what I do is I preheat the oven to 500 degrees, and I stick my Dutch oven in the oven, or not 500, it's 475. But I put my Dutch oven, no lid, into the oven while it preheats. So that way the Dutch oven gets really hot while the oven starts to get really hot. And then after 40 minutes of preheating the oven and Dutch oven, I'm ready to throw my loaves in there. And so I get, I think I have this saved in my highlights on my Instagram, and hopefully I can time another live where I can show the bread process.
Yeah, I'm sure we can do that.
But basically, when I bring my loaves out of the fridge, I just take some parchment paper, and then I gently lay it out. I use a lame to cut, to score the top of the bread gently.
Which you can just use a razor if you don't have that.
Yeah. Like a razor works. A knife, I mean...
You could use a knife. It has to be very, very sharp, though.
It has to be very sharp. I mean, if you have a razor, that's what you should be using. Knives just... Because a knife typically will tear, and then you lose the air and a lot of what you're working for from your dough, and then you don't get like a nice big rise from your loaf. So,
the tool she's talking about.
Lame. I can grab it.
Yeah, she'll grab it really quick. It's just a tool that you put a razor on, like an old safety razor. And then Catherine, we wished we could have used something other than a Dutch oven, but just because the cast iron gets so hot, that's specifically why we've been using that one. But here's the tool right here.
Lame.
And it just uses like an old safety razor. That's all it is.
This is just a razor that is curved because it's stuck onto the edge. And so when I score the top, this just gives me more control. Before I got the lame, I was just using the razor by itself.
What you can do. Yeah, I usually use those razors to shave with. And as far as like, could you use a box cutter? You could use a box cutter. I would definitely use like a fresh blade. Typically, safety razors are a little sharper, but you could use a box cutter.
Yeah.
And then what was it? Oh, how do you score it? I mean, essentially, if I'm assuming you kind of do it however you want.
Yeah, to keep it, like just a simple score, you just would do one scrape. It's hard to not like show the example.
What we'll do bread soon, and then
I'll time another live where I can show like the actual loaves, because like I won't be doing this until tomorrow morning. But usually like I do at least one score down the center that's like just off center, and I just do the length of the loaf. I like to get decorative, so I can do little like patterns and stuff, but you just at least need the one crossbody score, or you could just do a few scores across the top, kind of like how you would see like a baguette, how it has the lines across the top. But can kind of play around with it, get comfortable with it. And I feel like that.
Yeah, just do one quick like recap of everything you do.
Everything I do. So first, I feed Cordelia and little Sebastian. Once they pass the float test, which is when I pinch off a little bit of the starter and put it in water and it floats, it means there's enough CO2 and I can bake with it. And when I make a full loaf of sourdough, I create a leaven, which is essentially like a bigger starter. And so I will mix some of my starter with flour and water. The ratios are all in, or the measurements are all in Tara's book. That's what I've been following, which I can, like I said, it's a great book to get. It does make 4 loaves. I have 2 other bread books I'm going to be digging into because I'm running out of friends to give bread to, and I would love to find a really nice like 2 loaf recipe, because just having 1 loaf for us and then 1 to give away I think would be more than enough, especially because I'm not a professional bakery, so buying, you know, tons of bread flour is not exactly within budget right now.
We have been milling some of our own grains too for flour. We have a little attachment.
Yeah, I have like a little milling attachment for my KitchenAid, so that's fun. But yeah, so she passes the float test. I make the leaven. I let the leaven ferment overnight, and then the next day I make the leaven into a slurry, which I mix the leaven into fraction of water. I know this is all confusing without showing, but I mix the leaven into water until it fully dissolves, and then I add that to my flour, and then I mix. I add the salt, I let it rest, and then I do the fold and rest for a few hours, which is called bulk fermentation, and then I will pre-shape the loaf, and then it'll rest for a little bit, and then I stick it in the fridge to hang out overnight, and I bake it the next day. I preheat the Dutch oven, and in the oven, and I get it nice and hot. I bring out my loaves, I score them, throw them in the Dutch oven, put the lid on, bake for 25 minutes with the lid on. Then I remove the lid after 25 minutes and bake for another 20 minutes because you want like a nice golden crusty bread. And that's it. Then I take it out and let it cool.
They want to see the Dutch oven too, so.
My Dutch oven is...
It looks pretty bad because we've been using it so much.
It's not very beautiful.
It's alright though. I'll show you the view really quick. It's been really cloudy today, but it's pretty.
It's pretty.
Yeah, it's been nice. We just had the yard mowed too, so it looks good. But yeah, Jennifer, the links are all in the description. I think Leanne just reposted them too, so they should all be in there. And then the links to her Instagram and Facebook are on her website. But yeah, here's our Dutch oven.
Yeah, she's
seen better days.
She has, and especially because like when I'm baking at such hot temperatures over and over, it just discolors. I have like Barkeeper's Friend, which I know will.
I agree. It does look kind of cool like that too, in my opinion.
Yeah,
but
it looks
used.
rustic.
Yeah,
it looks beautiful and tiki. She's a lodge. That's what I have because that's what I found. See, here's some
the paper that we put in
some of the
parchment
paper I use for bread. But yeah, I found this for like an affordable price at I think Marshall's or Home Goods. My dream Dutch oven is a Staub. Those are.
What's the size of this Dutch oven? Is there a size for it?
5.7 or 5 quart, 6 quart.
Let me see. 6 quart.
6 quart.
That's the one we use. We'd love to get a bigger one, but
yeah, I really. Eventually, one day I'll have a kitchen full of beautiful Staub cast iron Dutch ovens. But my little lodge does the job for now.
I think we're adding some Dutch ovens to your website store too. So
yeah. Oh, I have the Staubs linked in my website store. I mean, if you want one, if you have the budget for one, they are well worth it. They are beautiful, and I've cooked with them with friends that have them, so I know they're quality product. But until I have one of my own, my handy dandy lodge does the trick.
Yep, and then the parchment paper does stay in there when you're baking, correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the parchment paper, let me use one of these as an example. So I take my parchment paper, and you want to cut it so it's basically just kind of the length of the loaf, essentially. So if my dough's in here, I would wrap it around and then very gently turn out the loaf, score it and then lift from the sides into the really hot Dutch oven. And then put the lid on and bake. And then when she's done, you can just lift it all out. And that's it.
Yep. Perfect. Does anybody have any more questions before we're done? I want to make sure we can answer as many as possible.
Yeah, and I know that on my link that I linked in the caption, and I can post it onto Saving Dinner's page, I just talk about starter. I don't talk about the bread baking process, but I have another sourdough post in the works for the blog that will go into more details of how I bake. But so hang tight. But
Perfect.
Any other questions?
Yep, and then Leanne just linked it again. If you guys need it, it's in the comments. It's also in the title of the video. Perfect. And then we're going to try to do a baking video soon. So
Yeah, hopefully next week when I show up on here, I can plan to have bread ready to go into the oven. So you can see how I turn it out of the banneton and how I score it. And that's that.
perfect. If you have any questions about it, you can send Caroline a message on Instagram or Facebook. And then hopefully we'll be doing this again soon.
Yeah, you can just find me at Inherited Salt.
Yes, we can only bake one loaf at a time. It doesn't necessarily mean that you can only bake one loaf at a time.
Yes, I don't know the process or if you'd have to adjust your oven temperature for baking more than one loaf if you have like multiple ovens and Dutch ovens, but I just do one at a time.
And we love you guys too. Thank you. And then, yes, you can sign up for the newsletter on her website. And we also have a cookbook fellowship she's doing right now. If you want to know more about that, look. Yeah, she's going to grab the cookbook right now. This is the video that never ends, but
Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat by Samin Nosrat. It's amazing. It's so freaking good. Just started the cookbook fellowship. Have like a little Facebook group that you can join. You can join it by signing up through the link in my website. Like if you go to my website, you'll see in the upper right hand corner the cookbook fellowship. Click on that. Just put in your name and email. Get you rolling. This book is amazing. I mean, I've been cooking for over a decade and still just reading about elements of cooking I already know about. Like it's looking at it through a whole different lens. It's pretty incredible. Can't recommend it enough. Everyone should have it on their shelf.
perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we love doing this, guys. And if you have any questions, let us know.
Maybe next time I'll have you show off your kombucha.
We'll try. That's what your mom was asking me to do.
He would rather not be in front of the camera.
How strong is the fermented taste? In my opinion, I don't taste the fermented taste at all.
And what?
Sourdough. The sourdough.
No.
She has kids. She wants to know. She said it might be hard to sell to her kids.
No, like, I mean, it tastes like bread. It doesn't taste like very sour. I don't have a very mature starter. My starter's like just over a month old. So I know the more mature it gets, the more sour it can get in flavor, but
as of right now, no. I mean, to me, it just tastes like bread.
yeah, and I mean, if you've ever had like sourdough from like a good bakery, and if your kids liked that, then they should like whatever you make.
Yeah, I would maybe try with like store-bought first and see if they like that.
Yeah, like a good reputable one.
And then baking mean on the stove. No, Mom, it does not mean on the stove. It means in the oven. We just use the Dutch oven so it gets a consistent heat.
Yeah, Dutch oven goes in the oven. Oven.
All right, perfect. All right, guys, again, if you have any more questions, just ask her on Facebook or Instagram. And again, we'll be doing this soon with baking.
That's right.
Perfect. Have a good day.